Hi, I'm Jenny Fish from One Big Happy Yarn Company. We want to be your local yarn shop no matter where you are. Welcome back to our One Big Happy Toe Up Socks Knit Along. In this episode, we'll be working on the heel and the leg portion of the toe up socks. If you still need supplies, check out onebighappy.com. Are you ready to work a German short row heel? Let's get started. Here on my sample, we have knit all the way up to the foot, and how we determine that size is by using the One Big Happy Sock Check. So on here, just to remind you, you put your foot down on here, you measure the length of your foot, then you subtract 2 inches. I have my highlighter tape on here telling me how far I need to knit to. So as I slide this in here, you want to measure it, making it comfortable. Don't stretch out your stitches too much. You want to be at the top of your knitting, not at the top of your needle. And now I'm ready to start the heel. The great thing about the German short row heel in this sock is you've already done German short rows. We did those in the toes, and this is worked the same exact way. Now, remember when we did our toe, we worked over half the stitches and then we added them back on. Well, we've got all of our stitches on our needles now. We are going to be working the heel only over half of the stitches that are currently on our needle. So we're back to that magic number of 28 for this pair that I'm working here. We'll start out working on the purl side. So what I want to do is leave these front stitches. Now here's my stitch marker. This is the front of my toe. So this is the back of my foot on this side. Okay, staying with me here? Okay, this is the front of my foot, the top of my foot. This is the back of my foot. I want my heel on the back of my foot. Makes sense, right? Okay, so we're going to pull this first needle out. We're going from knitting in the round back to knitting back and forth flat. Round 1 for the German short row heel is purl. We're going to purl all the way across, and then on the last stitch, we're going to do that German double stitch purl, the GDSP. And I'll remind you and show you how to do that. Okay, first stitch, super simple. We're just going to purl. Slide your needle in and purl all the way across these 28 stitches. Now I've purled this last stitch. I'm going to work my German double stitch purl. Bring my yarn to the front. I've flipped my work. I'm now looking at the right side of the work. Bring my needle in, slide that stitch to the right needle, and then kind of tug and pull up and over. So now that 1 stitch has now become 2 stitches. Slide my needle into the next stitch and knit. Knit all the way back. So now I'm knitting 27 stitches to get to the last stitch on the other side, and then we'll work the German double stitch knit. And I'll show you how that one works. I'm going to knit this last stitch here, turn. Now I'm going to slide this stitch over to the right needle, tug, lift up and over. So now I have those 2 bars to that stitch right there. Now, because I am on the purl side, I need to bring the yarn to the front again so that it's in position to purl. Make sure that's nice and tight on your right needle, and then I'll purl all the way back. Continue going back and forth until you have 7 double stitches, or for your pattern, whatever size you're making, make sure that you have the same amount of double stitches on each side of your center stitches. And then I'll show you how to work those double stitches and finish up the heel. All right, now that we have finished up the first part of our heel where we have worked the double stitches on both sides, you should have 7 on each side. It's worked exactly like we worked the toe, so you can go back and watch that if you need a little more of a breakdown. But what I've done is I've gone ahead and worked up to having 2 left on each side. You'll follow the pattern instructions for the size that you're wearing, or you will adjust the recipe for the foot that you're making the sock for. I am on the purl side here. I have 2 double stitches on each side. At this point, I've already worked the other 5, but I wanted to show you how to work these real quick. and then how to get back to knitting in the round. And I'll show you what that double stitch looks like. Here, just one more stitch. There we go. Okay, so on the purl side, here is the double. Here on the back side, there's the 4 stitches in there from making the double. So on this one, I'm just going to go ahead and purl the first one. Then I'm going to purl the next one. And this one I'm going to make into the double. And this is the GDSP that I'm making right now. So I turned it over. I want my working yarn in front. I slide that stitch onto my right needle, tug on this. You want this pretty tight. You want it to be pretty secure, because the tighter this is, the less gaps you have in your seam that you're making here. Okay, so I flip that over. I've got my 4 strands right through there. I go ahead and knit the next stitch. I'm going to knit all the way back until I get to the double stitch on the other side of my work. Like I said, I've already worked 5 of these on each side. And I'm just working the last few here so I can show you what it looks like on the heel. But it's exactly the same as the toe. And we're calling them German double stitches. It's German short row. You'll see in patterns that it's listed as a GSR. In our pattern, we broke it down to GDS purl, or GDSP, and GDSK for knit and purl, so you can distinguish what side of the work that you're working on. Okay, so here is my double stitch here. I'm going to go ahead and knit this. This is the double. There's my 4 strands on the other side. It's hard to see that 4th strand, but they're all there. Go ahead and knit that like normal. Then I'm going to knit this one, and I'm going to make the German double stitch knit. Make sure I'm splitting my yarn there, so I want to make sure I get through that without splitting my yarn. There we go. Okay, knit that stitch. Now I'm going to turn over, slide that back to the right needle, tug on this to get it tight, and then flip it over like that. There's my 4 strands. Now, because this is a purl side, we need to bring the working yarn back to the front like this. And now I'm going to purl across this side. Okay, by working these short rows in this little section here, we have built up this cup area, and this is what's going to be over the heel. Let's see if I can turn this sideways, and you can see how it puckers out like that. That's going to be the heel. So it kind of looks like a tube sock when you look at it straight on, but when you look at it at the side, you can see the shaping that's forming here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and purl across this one. Purl that last double. Okay, I'm finishing up almost to that last stitch here. You know, it's kind of hard to see. My hands are over that, but this is the last double right there that we're getting ready to work on the purl side. Here we go. So we're going to purl that. There is not a stitch after that, so we just purl that one and then turn our work. We're not going to slide that one over. We finished this in. Now we're just going to continue to knit like normal on here. So we're going to knit all the way across. This is the back side of the foot. And then once we finish this side, we'll be able to start knitting in the round, going back to that stockinette stitch in the round to knit the leg portion of the sock. I'm on the knit side. I'm on the right side of my work. knitting these stitches here. Let's see here. There we go. I knit faster than I purl. Okay. Here we go. We're coming up on the last double from that side. Knit that one. Okay, we're going to knit this last stitch, and now we're ready to go back to knitting in the round. We've worked our heel. See that little portion right there? So sometimes when you're doing this, you're stretching your work as you're working that back flap. And sometimes you will get a gap like we have here on this sock. See my little gap right there? Okay, on this one over here, you see I've closed that gap up. I don't have such a gap there. I'm going to show you a little trick on how to close those gaps up. So back here on my work, I have got my needles back into beginning setup for magic loop. Here is my beginning of the round stitch marker. Now I'm working right here. I do have a little space here. This is from tension, from pulling on it, making that heel. What I want to do, pull out my back needle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pick up some stitches right there. And I'm just going to knit into that. And then I'm going to come right in here because this is kind of a bit of a space that I want to close up. I'm going to put an extra one there. I'm going to slide these 2 stitches back onto this needle here. Tighten that up pretty good. And then I'm going to knit those 2 stitches together. Tighten it up again. I'm going to slide that back on my needle and I'm going to knit those 2 stitches together. So in essence, I've just added a couple of extra stitches in there to close that gap and get rid of that hole. Now I can continue knitting across the top of my foot. And that closes that up. If you're lucky enough to not have that space, you don't need to worry about doing that. But if it does happen, go ahead and put in a couple extra stitches, add them in and decrease them right back out so it doesn't change your stitch count. And then I'll show you what that looks like right there. That gap is closed. I have some good closure right there between the cord and my needle. So when I come back around, it'll cinch it back up. You won't even tell that that happened. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and knit across this top, and then I'll show you how to do that again on the other side. That little tip is not in the pattern. That's just something as you go along and you knit, you learn little ways to fix little oopsies, or sometimes your knitting gets a little stretched out as you're working. It's just something extra you can do. You don't have to do that. Okay, I'm almost here to the other side. Here we go. This side doesn't have as much space as the other side did. I'm just going to bring my needle. Let's see, let's go back to the beginning like as if I was starting the next round. So I'm back into the magic loop starting position, pull my back needle out. For this one, I don't have quite as big of a gap, so I'm just going to go into right in here and make that stitch. I'm sliding it onto this needle here, and then I'm going to work that in with the first stitch on that needle. And boom, close that right up. And continue knitting. Now you're ready to continue knitting in the round in stockinette until you get to the desired length that you would like. I also want to go back and show you the sock check. Another good use for the sock check is to check the length of your leg, and you can mark that on the sock check as well. Let me get to the end of this row and I'll show you how we do that. Now measuring with the sock check, if you are doing cuff down socks, you can use it for that as well, because the toe portion will be open. After you make your heel on a cuff down sock, you just slide the sock check in where your needles are at the toe, and you measure from the heel to the toe instead of from the toe to the heel, and it works exactly the same way. So it works for both versions of sock knitting. Okay, I'm to the end of here. So I've got just this little bit here done, but what you can do is slide your sock check in here and measure. If you're making a little booty sock, you can measure it about here. If you're making a longer one. For me, I actually ended up making my leg and my foot portion exactly the same, so I used the same highlighter tape and marked the same spot. So I'll show you what that looks like. Once you continue knitting in the round, then your sock will look like this. I have this one here. Let me set this aside. I have this one here where I have knit the leg all the way up, and I can slide my sock check in the top here all the way down to the heel portion, and you can see, okay, this is where I'm going to start my cuff and my ribbing. Finish knitting the leg portion of your sock. Mark or note the size. Trust me, you will want that size when you're working on the next sock. Then join me in the next episode as we finish up these socks with the cuff, a stretchy bind off, and blocking. Remember, you can get a kit with the yarn and the pattern at onebighappy.com. Hit the subscribe button below and click the bell to be notified every time we have a new video. Happy knitting!